Welcome in, everybody, to the Gooshbagz Fantasy Football League podcast. We are in the wake of week 5 of the NFL. And, guys, I'm excited to be here. It's Tuesday night, bringing it to you early this week. I got some stuff going on this Wednesday, so I decided to get this show on the road today. I just wanted to get this going. I'm so excited. We had so much stuff going on this week, so let's get right into it. We have big news in the NFL this week. The biggest was the injury to Mason Rudolph. Now that was an insane hit. I guess the hit was pretty bad, but the way he got hit and fell. It looked like he looked like a rag doll, just falling onto the. And it was. I watched that and I was just in horror of how that looked. And then on top of all that, he was out for a good minute or so. I'm not quite sure how long he was out. And then the freaking golf cart that was supposed to cart him off the field and keep him safe didn't work. They had like 6 guys push the golf cart off the field, so he had to get up and walk off the field with some help. Now they took him to the hospital, and I think he stayed overnight, and then he went home. Fortunately, it was similar to like what Jamal Williams did last week. He is in the concussion protocol. Hopefully, he'll be back, in a couple weeks, because that was just rough, and that's the stuff you don't like to see. Another thing I did hear was that they had another golf cart at the facility. And for some reason, I think on the other sideline, and for some reason, they didn't bring that golf cart out to cart him off. They were like, oh, he wants to walk off. So, I don't know. It looked weird. They took his face mask off when he was on the ground, and then, when he stood up, it looked kind of like one of them old school football helmets with no face mask, and it was a little interesting, but best of luck to Mason Rudolph. I hope he recovers quickly. And that it's not as bad as it looked when it happened. Into other news, Kyle Allen and Teddy Bridgewater, backup quarterbacks, are still undefeated this year. They've both had 2 or 3 games now, and both of them have remained undefeated, which is insane. This was just a huge fantasy week. There were so many boomers this week. It was insane. This was the first day since 2007 where there was a 5 touchdown pass game by Deshaun Watson, a 4 rushing touchdown game by Aaron Jones, and a 3 receiving touchdown game by Will Fuller. This is also the first time ever that 5 players have recorded 40 or more PPR fantasy points. Though the list includes Will Fuller, Aaron Jones, Christian McCaffrey, Deshaun Watson, and Michael Thomas. So there was some insane points being scored, and just remember, those of you that lost because of one of these, it was a fluke. You lost because of a fluke. But if you won because of these, you knew the breakout was coming. So it's not a surprise. You knew it was coming. So the top scorer in the league this week was Big Ben's Bathroom, Chad Keen's team, with 170.2 fantasy points on the back of Aaron Jones, Michael Thomas, and a person who's just outside this 40 PPR point week was Amari Cooper. So he had some insane points on his team this week. He got lucky that they all kind of lined up in one week, and he put up monster numbers for it. So I just Venmo'd him the $10 not too long ago, about a half hour ago, not even a half hour ago. So he is set for the week. Now, for the studs of the week, from the QB position, obviously, I already mentioned this, Deshaun Watson. He had his huge game against the Falcons this week. He had 41.7 fantasy points. He threw 28 for 33 passes, 426 yards, 5 touchdowns, and he also included 4 rushes for 47 yards. Now, this was just a huge football game with so many points scored through the whole game. The Houston offense finally clicked, and the whole offense just went ham. So, and not only was last week a good week, good matchup for him, but week 6 is also a great matchup for Deshaun Watson. It's Houston versus the Kansas City Chiefs, and I already mentioned in the chat this is going to be a high scoring game. This game is going to be insane. There's going to be no defense played whatsoever in this game, and those offenses are just going to go. They're just going to go nuts. It's going to be bananas. So, on to the other side of the football from that Houston Falcons game, Matt Ryan had 31.9 fantasy points. He threw 32 completions for of the 46 passes he threw. He threw for 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. He also had 3 rushes for 7 yards. So that was some big rushing out of Matt Ryan this week. But they had to play catch up most of the game, so he was throwing all game. Russell Wilson also had a massive game this week. It wasn't so much in the volume category, but he was hyper efficient, which is what Russell Wilson always does. Always. He had 29.9 fantasy points. He threw 17 for 23 with 268 yards and 4 touchdowns. He also had 8 rushes for 32 yards. Now that rushing work, that is what you're looking for from Russell Wilson. While, it's great to get those 4 touchdowns, what gave Russell Wilson that floor was that running game. So if he can keep running at least a little bit this year, he's going to be fantasy relevant almost every week because he's going to have a high floor. He only threw for 270 yards. I guess that's decent, but these big games, these 30-point games that you're seeing are usually from over 300 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns. So he only had 270. He did have his 4 touchdowns though, and that's what makes him hyper efficient. 4 touchdowns on 23 passes. That is 1 pass or 1 touchdown every 6 passes. It's insane. I don't know how he does it, but he's always been able to do it. Last year, I think he had the highest touchdown percentage per pass of any of the quarterbacks. So he just continues to do that this year. Now, a surprising stud of the week, he's kind of the honorable mention, number 4 on the week, Teddy Bridgewater. He had 314 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 interception. I did make the mention last week that all he's doing is managing the games. He's just a game manager. He's throwing the ball like 5 yards down the field. What does he do? He comes back with a 300-yard passing game with 4 touchdowns. He just wants to prove me wrong. You know what? In this podcast, I should just go through my whole team and just say, this person is just average or mediocre at best. Because whenever I say something like that, I feel like immediately the next week, that player just goes off. So, I don't know. Maybe I should start saying some bad juju about my team. James Conner is mediocre at best. James Conner, you need to step up your game. I don't think you can, though, because, you got the third string quarterback in. The defenses are going to be stacking the box against you. They're going to make the quarterback. There's no way. You're screwed. You're screwed. Hopefully that gets him going. All right, on to the running back position for this week. The studs at running backs. Aaron Jones had 45.7 fantasy points. He was finally freed. Aaron Jones, he had 19 rushes for 107 yards and 4 touchdowns. He also had 7 catches for 75 yards. He finally got out of the difficult part of his schedule, and hopefully he can kick some ass, keep kicking some ass going forward. As a Packers fan, I really hope that happens. But since he's not on my fantasy team, I hope he has duds only when I'm playing against him. So, he was looking good. The Packers offense this last week was running through Aaron Jones. So, if they have to do that, I'll talk about it a little bit later, but Aaron Rodgers was a dud this week because he only had to throw for 200 yards and he didn't have any touchdowns because everything was going to Aaron Jones. So that was why I was concerned about Devontae Adams. and that's why I traded Devontae Adams because I thought that was how the Packers offense was going to run this year. So if that keeps up, you know, then good on me for trading Devontae Adams. However, I do know that if the Packers need to throw the ball, they can do that as well. So I think this is a very, very solid dual threat offense that won't have a hard time staying in any of the games that they're in. Now, stud number 2 should not come as a surprise is Christian McCaffrey. 44.7 fantasy points. He had 19 rushes for 176 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 6 catches for 61 yards and 1 touchdown. He is a consistent player that is at the top each week. He's number 1 overall by far. He's just carrying Courts' team on his back every single week, and he's carrying the Panthers on his back every single week. So I don't see this changing going forward. Even when Cam Newton comes back, I don't think they're just gonna keep feeding Christian McCaffrey. He's a monster. He's a monster. Now, a surprise stud this week in the running back position. I guess there were a couple. First one is Josh Jacobs, 27.8 fantasy points versus the Bears. Nobody saw this coming. The Bears have stopped the run all year. Nobody has been able to run on the Bears. And it looked like the Bears offense just did not travel to London with them. Or Bears defense, I'm sorry. The Bears defense didn't travel to London with them. I don't know what happened. He had 26 rushes for 123 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 catches for 20 yards. Josh Jacobs, it's really sad. I was really gonna try to trade for him last week before this game because I was gonna wait actually. I was gonna wait till after this game because I thought he was gonna have a bad game, and then I would buy him low, and he has a good schedule or a better or ish schedule coming up. Um, I think they're playing Minnesota, and then they have a bye. But then after the bye, I'm pretty sure Josh Jacobs will just eat in the second half. So we'll see how it goes. But the honorable mention to the studs this week was Burita in the Monday night game. He had one rushing touchdown, one passing touchdown, or one receiving touchdown. He had a great game this week. And the 49ers are just running the ball so well that both Tevin Coleman and Burita were fantasy relevant this week. So I think that team is just. I mean, they have a great defense. They're the epitome of the grinder team, like what the Bears want to be, basically. They have a great defense, and they can just run the ball all game, just eat time on the clock, and they'll just wear teams down and get the victories. So they're looking pretty good this year. I think in some of the power rankings, they were in the top 5. Most of the power ranking websites had them in the top 5 this week. So look for the 49ers coming up because they're looking pretty good. All right, on to the wide receiver position in the studs category. Will Fuller the fifth, coming in with 46.7 fantasy points. He had 14 catches, 217 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That was a monster day, and no one had him on their team. He was dropped by Adam and Courts this year, which was really understandable because he did not have a game over 10 fantasy points before then. So I'm expecting everybody to basically drop their whole fab budget on Will Fuller. For me, that's $49. I know I told you guys 45. I was trying to lowball it, so maybe you guys would throw in 46, 47, and then I would put in 49 and win him. But I guess that's up. No, if I wait to put this out until Wednesday morning, I could get the win on Will Fuller and get him for my 49 fab dollars. I think it would be worth it. He's definitely a start every single week going forward. He has no bust potential. It's just all boom. So I think he's solid going forward. Wide receiver stud number 2, Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas. He had 35.7 fantasy points, 11 catches for 182 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He is the king of the Teddy Bridgewater short passes. He's making his money just getting hella volume from Teddy Bridgewater. He's the only wide receiver that Teddy Bridgewater trusts. And that's how he puts up 180 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's consistently in the top over the last like 3 weeks when Teddy's been playing. So as long as Teddy Bridgewater, I mean, that's why Michael Thomas was so good with Drew Brees because he threw the short passes too. Michael Thomas is everything that Keenan Allen wishes he was. You know, Keenan Allen, he's a great wide receiver, and he's pretty close to Michael Thomas in terms of uh, of fantasy relevance. But Michael Thomas, just the catch efficiency, he always has a high catch percentage. He's always, you know, he's a monster in PPR. So I don't see that changing in the coming weeks, at least until Drew Brees gets back. And even when Drew Brees gets back, Michael Thomas is going to be a monster. Amari Cooper had 34.1 fantasy points against the Packers. It's really unfortunate. He had 11 catches for 226 yards and one touchdown. I need to work on my speaking. He also had a huge game this week. I was watching that game as a Packers fan, and Amari Cooper was just doing whatever he wanted to the Packers defense. He was open every single play. It was so sad to watch. Like I was watching that first half when there were like 2 or 3 turnovers by two turnovers by the Dallas in that first half, and they were Dak's fault most. Well, all right. They were both Amari Cooper and Dak's fault because that first interception, Dak did throw it slightly behind Amari Cooper, but it was easily catchable by an NFL receiver, and Amari just missed it, popped it up. But had he caught that ball, it would have been a touchdown. Like, what's his name? Jair Alexander was nowhere near Amari Cooper. He was like 3 steps behind him. And that's why when it popped up when it was behind Amari Cooper, it came right to his gut because he was behind by like 3 or 4 steps. He had no chance. No chance to catch Amari Cooper on that touchdown or on that potential touchdown. He would have had that was a long pass too. That would have been like 260 yards and 2 touchdowns. He would have joined that 40-point club. But man, that was just an insane day by Amari Cooper, and the Packers just could do nothing to stop him. Now, wide receiver number 4, I guess he's the honorable mention technically because I'm doing the top 3, but whatever. DJ Chark, I love talking about this guy. He's the favored receiver for quarterback Gardner Minshew. Now, DJ Chark had 32.4 fantasy points this week. He had 8 catches for 164 yards and 2 touchdowns. He has just blown away all expectations of him this year, and he's almost been matchup proof. We'll have to see this week coming up. I think he's playing. Carolina this last week was supposed to be a tough matchup for him. I forgot who Bradbury. I think. I don't know who the cornerback is on the Panthers, but he's supposed to be really good. He's been shutting down. He shut down Mike Evans and whatnot. But this week he's playing Marshawn Lattimore in New Orleans, and that'll be a tough matchup. We'll see if he's matchup proof, but nobody's stopped him so far, so he's been fantastic. Now on to the tight ends. We had a last-minute addition for the tight end studs this week. George Kittle, he had 17.8 fantasy points on Monday night. He had 6 catches for 70 yards and 1 touchdown, which is good because none of the other starting tight ends really had a good game. Like, there were no monsters from the starting tight ends, and it was all like randos. So, and it was also good to see George Kittle finally live up to our expectations of him. I think this is also his first game above 10 fantasy points. So, he was drafted in the 3rd, 4th round. I don't know. I think it was the 3rd round in our draft. And, you're expecting big things every week, and you just weren't getting that. So it was good to see him get that. Tight end number 2 on the week was Gerald Everett. He had 17.1 points. He had 7 catches for 136 yards, and he's had 2 decent games in a row now. So, kind of at the expense of Robert Woods and Brandon Cooks. He actually got a lot of his points, a lot of his looks when after Brandon Cooks kind of went out with his injury. So maybe he's dependent on not having all three wide receivers in there. Um, I think he was last week. He was only relevant because he had a touchdown, but he still got a couple catches. He might be a good streamer for this week, but I don't know. I don't think he's very reliable going forward because they've got so many weapons in LA, and they've started throwing to Gurley some more too. So I don't know if his volume is going to be very reliable. Um, yeah, so it might be worth a stream, but if you need a tight end for a buy or something, but otherwise, I don't know if he's really worth it. Darren Fells was the other one, and he had a good game 2 weeks ago, but this was another result of the huge Houston game, Houston and the Falcons game. So he had 15 points. He had 2 catches for 20 yards and 2 touchdowns. So his touchdowns were on both of his catches. So those points in Houston had to go somewhere. Deshaun Watson has thrown 3 touchdowns to him in the last 3 weeks. So it's weird because he really hasn't been a relevant tight end. There hasn't been a relevant tight end in Houston while Watson has been there, but he's been throwing a little bit more to the tight ends this year. So once again, I don't think he's very reliable. Darren Fells, he's very touchdown dependent. Clearly, he only had 2 catches and 2 touchdowns. So he's getting the touchdowns, but that's not a sticky stat. So on to the duds for this week. For the QB position, dud number 1, Baker Mayfield. -2 fantasy points. He threw 8 for 22 for 100 yards. Oh god, I'm sorry guys. I'm tired. He completed 8 catches of his 22. So, he only had 100 yards, 2 interceptions and 1 fumble. It is time to drop him. I don't know why he was being started. Brandon, why did you start him? I don't understand. It makes no sense. He hasn't had a game over 15 fantasy points this year. He had 15.5 and 15.7. He was half of the guys on waiver wires are better than him. He's a dud for the year. He's the year's dud. I don't think he'll get better. He'll also, part of the reason it's not really all his fault. He's having a really tough time. His offensive line sucks. He's playing with like his feet are on fire. He doesn't stay in the pocket for more than a second. He's immediately as he's taking the snap, he runs out of the pocket because he knows that the defenders are after him because his offensive line sucks. It might be worse than Deshaun Watson's offensive line, which is really saying something. So until they do something on their offensive line, I don't think that Baker Mayfield is going to be relevant. It's going to be tough for OBJ to be relevant, who will make an appearance later in this dud category. And any of his pass catchers are just, it's tough to see them being relevant while the offensive line is so bad. They just can't get any offense going. The other dud in the QB category was Aaron Rodgers. He had 9.4 fantasy points. He had 238 passing yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. Like I said previously, I think this is what the Packers offense is going to be this year with their solid defense. They don't need a potent passing game like they did previously because they were catching up in all of their games. They don't need that. If their defense can hold teams to less points, they're not going to they don't need to pass the ball. So it all kind of depends on the matchup, I think. I thought this one was going to be a little bit more of a shootout against they have a pretty good offense in Dallas, and they did do pretty good. They just got unlucky with some turnovers, but I think with some higher powered offenses coming up, I think they're gonna have to do a little bit more throwing. So it'll kind of depend. Aaron Rodgers is a matchup dependent quarterback now. He's not an auto lock for a top quarterback performance every week. So as much as I hate to say it, but that's not what they need. So that's not what he's doing. All right, in the running back category, Jalen Samuels, who actually this is big news that just came out today. Jalen Samuels had a knee scope done, and he's going to be out for 2 to 4 weeks. It's the same thing that Michael Gallup just got done, I believe. Just kind of cleaning out the knee. It's a non-invasive procedure, but he'll be out for like a month ish. So he only had one fantasy point this week. He had three receptions for 11 yards, but he also threw for an interception. James Conner did all of the running and not Jalen, and going forward for the next month or so, Jalen is going to be irrelevant. And so my pickup of the week last week goes down. Anytime I talk good about somebody, they do bad, and anytime I talk bad about somebody, they do good. So I don't even know. Maybe I shouldn't go into this this podcasting business because I'm just not. I haven't been accurate. I haven't. So the running back dud number 2 on the week is Adrian Peterson. He had 1.8 fantasy points. He had 7 rushes for 18 yards rushing, and that was it. But that was kind of to be expected against New England's D. They're monsters. You can ask Andrew Quartz. So he's got a juicy matchup this week. They're playing against Miami. Washington is. So they just fired their offensive coordinator, and the new offensive coordinator. No, they fired Jay Gruden, which was their head coach, I think. But yeah, their new interim head coach said he wants to run the ball. So Adrian Peterson is gonna go nuts against Miami, most likely. They're just gonna run it like 50 times with Adrian Peterson. So he should have a good game this week, and then after that, I just don't think he's worth anything going forward. Melvin Gordon had 5.8 fantasy points. He's just kind of easing his way into the offense. I think his role is going to increase in the coming weeks. So also Austin Eckler had 15 catches, I think, this week. So I think Melvin Gordon's going to eat a little bit into that. But most of the running is going to go to Melvin Gordon, and he'll get a few, 4 or 5 catches in the passing game each week, which will kind of bring him back up to his former glory, I think. And then LaShawn McCoy had 1.3 fantasy points. He only had 2 touches in this game, and the Chiefs didn't really run the ball at all this week. It was really confusing. I don't know why they didn't run the ball. The Colts defense sucks against the run, so I don't know why they did that. But either way, when they did run, it mostly went to Damian Williams. And so I don't know if that will even out in the next couple weeks or next week when they realize that the offense wasn't going anywhere. But LaShawn McCoy, if he doesn't keep getting the work that he previously did in the timeshare, he might be back to backup duties. So I don't know. We'll find out over the next couple weeks. On the wide receiver position, Keenan Allen was a big dud for me this week. He had 3.8 fantasy points. This is worse than when I had Devontae Adams. He had 4 catches for 18 yards. I think he was he had a rough time. Tough matchup for him this week. But he has an easier schedule going forward. Hopefully he picks it back up. Like half of the Chargers offense is out, so they need to throw it to somebody. Their offense looked really bad last week, so they need to throw it to somebody. They just got to realize they got to get Keenan Allen more involved. Another wide receiver goose this week was Mike Evans. He was shut down by Marshawn Lattimore this week, and Godwin has definitely taken over as the 1A. It's very difficult to trust Mike Evans this year. I guess he's always kind of been the boomer bust guy, but he's always ended up in the top 10. Most of the years he's ended up in the top 10, and it's not looking good this year for that because I think Godwin has definitely just kind of taken over that one role and I know I said that last week, but Godwin just like cemented his role as the one. He's been a consistent target for um, what's his name? He's been I can see his face. Jameis Winston. Um, he's been a consistent target for Jameis Winston, and Mike Evans has just kind of faded into the background. He's had a few good games, but I don't know how much you can trust him going forward. Julio Jones, again in this dud category, 5.7 fantasy points. He had 3 catches for 42 yards. I'm surprised he didn't get more work. I guess there are just so many mouths to feed in Atlanta these days. And actually, surprising stat of the week was that Mohamed Sanu was on the field more than Julio Jones was this week. It was kind of surprising. Mohamed Sanu has been getting that steady work. He's been getting the short yardages, but he's been getting the steady work, and um, it's really it's really concerning to see Julio not get the same number of snaps as Mohamed Sanu. So we'll have to keep an eye on that, monitor that, and I think Julio is going to get his no matter what. But as far as Calvin Ridley goes, his value might go to. He did have a good game this week, and maybe it'll just be similar to the Rams offense, where 1 week, one or two of them have good games, and the third one kind of gets left out. So, yeah, we'll see. And then another dud this week, Emmanuel Sanders, 1 catch for 9 yards. And I think I said this last week, but Courtland Sutton is taking over that offense, similarly to Chris Godwin. Not in as dominant a fashion, but Emmanuel Sanders has kind of faded to the background in the last couple of weeks, and Courtland Sutton has been seeing all the work from Joe Flacco. And that's what I was saying. I don't think Joe Flacco can support 2 top 15 wide receivers. I think one of the 2 is going to have to fade, and I think Emmanuel Sanders is looking like he's the one. And the last dud for the wide receiver position this week was OBJ, and I mentioned before that offense is looking rough. At the tight end position, it was kind of a desolate wasteland this week. But Greg Olsen, Goose, second week in a row, he's in the dud category. I thought that Kyle Allen might throw to him a little bit more this week. Backup quarterbacks usually love tight ends and running backs, but he really only had eyes for Christian McCaffrey. So Greg Olsen was looking like a tough sell with Kyle Allen in. The other one was Eric Ebron. Again, 1 catch for 8 yards. He's strictly touchdown reliant. I don't know. That's just how he is with Jacoby Brissett. He hasn't been getting the work. Jack Doyle has gotten a little bit more of the work, but still not much. All right, now for our matchup reactions category. What the segment? Matchup reactions segment. Matchup number 1: the Scary Terrys versus Roger Cupp. Scary Terrys win 114-4 to 65.5. Kyler Murray and Dalvin Cook led the Scary Terrys to a win over the low-scoring Rogers Cup. The studs on Scary Terry's team. Kyler Murray had 25.4 fantasy points. He had no passing touchdowns, but he did have 93 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. That rushing, though, that gives him a great floor, and I am so happy that I traded for Kyler Murray instead of some other dud quarterback. I had that Lamar Jackson action going on, but Kyler Murray, I think he's a good enough substitute where I got my value back for Lamar Jackson. Dalvin Cook also had a massive game. He had 22.8 fantasy points, 21 rushes for 132 yards, also 6 catches for 86 yards. Number 3 wide running back of the year. Can't complain. He was my 3rd round pick, and I am so happy that I got him there. Now the duds. I already mentioned Keenan Allen. I need something a little bit better for my wide receiver 1. Also, Robert Woods had 5 catches for 48 yards. I really need to figure out something in the wide receiver category. I have Michael Gallup now. I picked him back up, and or did I ever drop him? I don't know. I might have dropped him. I might have picked him back up. I don't know, but I have him, and I'm gonna play him this week because I was a little sketchy coming off the injury that he was gonna do well against the Packers. So I have much more confidence in him now, and I'm rolling him out this week. So we'll see how it goes. But all right, Rogers Cup's studs. Allen Robinson II had 25.2 fantasy points. He had 7 catches for 97 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he was the only one that did anything for the Bears. He finally had his breakout game with Chase Daniels. The difference is Chase Daniels can actually pass the ball, where Mitch Trubisky cannot. So he finally had a good game. He's been decent all year, but he actually had like a very good game this week, so that was really good. Zeke was okay. He had 62 rushing yards and 1 touchdown, but to be honest, he should have had a bigger game against a crappy Packers run defense that actually stopped him pretty well. I was very surprised and very happy. Uh, you know, I'm feeling better about the Packers defense. Kind of. They switched roles this week, so. But Zeke should have had a monster game against the Packers. But you know, he did what he did, and it didn't quite get Adam the win. So the duds for Adam's team, basically everybody else on his team. Um, I don't know if he's trying to trade for draft picks or what. I don't think we decided that we were gonna trade for draft picks, so I guess that's an option potentially, but I have to figure out how I'd have to figure out how all of that works. So, um, but he's doing his best Miami Dolphins impression, um, here. So, uh, I don't know. It might be a lost cause for Adam this year. 0-5. So, I mean, he could come back. He'd have to win every game from now on. So we'll see how it goes. Matchup number 2, Brandon Cooks Kittlecorn versus Carry On My Wayward Son. Brandon Cooks Kittlecorn won 155.3 points to 112.4 points. Ryo's team couldn't overcome Christian McCaffrey, Philip Lindsay, Matt Ryan, and Brandon Cooks Kittlecorn gets another win. Now the studs for Brandon Cooks Kittlecorn. Christian McCaffrey, clearly, beast every week. I'm just not going to talk anymore about him. Philip Lindsay. Now, this was, he could have a big game each week. He could have a bad game each week. You never know with him. You never know when he's going to go off. He had 22.7 fantasy points for 114 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. He also had 4 catches for 33 receiving yards. So he had a great game. And Matt Ryan also had a good game. I already mentioned before. He had his 32 fantasy points ish, and they kind of led him to victory with a decent game for New England's defense. They had like 15 points or something. I didn't put that really in the studs because they, a stud game for New England's defense is like 20 points or more. So. The only dud on Brandon Cook's Kittlecorn was Mike Evans' Goose, and that is a big dud, but the rest of his team just had big performances and, led him to victory over Carry On My Wayward Son. All right, now for the studs in Carry On's team. Cooper Kupp had 22.2 points. He had 9 catches for 117 yards and 1 touchdown. Goff, like I said last week, Goff only has eyes for Kupp. He is definitely the number 1 in that offense. I think he's the number 3 wide receiver overall this year. So he's having a great season so far, and I'm sure that's going to keep up. Even Gerald Everett's involvement has not been affecting Kupp. Josh Jacobs also had a big game for him. 27.8 fantasy points against the Bears. Yep, that was a great game. Yeah, so I already talked about both of those guys. So those guys were the studs for the week, and the duds. Sammy Watkins goosed this week. He is not doing so hot after his hot start. Actually, I lied. Sammy Watkins got hurt on like the first play of the game. So um, I think Sammy Watkins will actually be better once Tyreek. Well, hopefully, one he recovers from his injury. I don't know. I forgot what injury he had. Was it a hamstring or something? But once Tyreek is back, I think Tyreek will get a lot of the number one coverage, and so Sammy will be able to get open some more, and it might be like a Tyler Boyd situation where he does better when AJ Green is in. Um, and then Carson Wentz was kind of a dud this week. He had 12 points, 12.1 points for 189 passing yards and one touchdown. They won by like 30 points, so he didn't really need to throw the ball. They were just running the whole time. Matchup number 3. My tight end Ertz when I fart versus the line I never hit you, I did not. My tight end Ertz won 137.6 to 100.7 points. Tom Brady and Adam Thielen led the way to a victory over the line I never hit you due to a goose egg from Arizona's defense. So the studs from my tight end Ertz when I fart. Tom Brady had 23.9 fantasy points. He had 348 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. See, the whereas the Eagles just ran the ball the whole game because they were up. The Pats don't feel like they need they don't need to do that. They just keep throwing the ball. Tom Brady averages like 38 passes a game, which is insane. They just have another easy game this week coming up against the Giants, so I'm sure he's going to have another huge game going on Thursday. So, and then Adam Thielen, the squeaky wheel got the grease this week. You complain, you have a monster game. That's just how it goes. He had 7 catches for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, I think he's clearly the one over Stefon Diggs this year. Stefon Diggs he complained a little bit, but he's not as squeaky as Adam Thielen. So I just think Thielen is the guy for Kirk Cousins, and I think he's the guy he looks to when he passes, which isn't very frequently. So the duds for my tight end Ertz when Eifert was the Chicago defense, who got destroyed by Oakland's offense. And like I said before, it didn't seem like they showed up to the game with the rest of the team in London. Now for Zerline, I never hit you, studs. Russell Wilson, 29.9 fantasy points. He is the overall number 1 quarterback this year in our league. He's been kicking ass. So good for him. Good for you, Russell Wilson. You're usually a second half sort of guy, but you're getting the number 1 in the first half this year. You're number 1 in my heart, Russell Wilson. And then Sony Michel had 19.8 fantasy points. Finally, he had 91 rushing yards with 1 touchdown and 3 catches for 32 yards. He finally had a good game, and the Pats, like I said, have an easy schedule coming up. For some reason, they give the Patriots the easiest schedule after they win the Super Bowl. This must be their way of cheating this year, is they just paid the league to give them the easiest schedule they could possibly have. So Sony Michel should actually be good for the next few weeks, because even though they throw the ball a massive amount, he also had I don't know how many rushes. It was like 6. He had a bunch of rushes, 19 rushes. He had a lot of rushes, so I expect him to keep being consistent for the next few weeks, even though he's had a rough start. So here we go, Sony Michel. He had 16 rushes for 91 yards, so his efficiency is going up. Good for you, Sony Michel. All right, the duds for Zerline, I'll never hit you, is Arizona's defense. They had 0 points. They had a rough game against Cincinnati with it's not quite an air raid offense, but they have a fast pace and actually kind of a decent offense. They just have no defense. So I kind of saw this coming. Arizona's defense really isn't that great, but Cincinnati's offense isn't as bad as people think it is. And then Melvin Gordon had a rough game, as I mentioned before. He's like I said, he's just getting into the offense, and I think he'll get better in the next couple weeks once he gets more involved. Now, matchup number 4, Big Ben's Bathroom versus Try and Stop Me from Auto Picking. Big Ben's Bathroom wins 170.2 to 73.1. Big Ben's Bathroom finally put up a good game while the low scoring against him hasn't stopped. So the studs for Big Ben's Bathroom, he had the 3 stack: Aaron Jones, Michael Thomas, and Amari Cooper. Any one person would be lucky to have one of these 3 on their team, and he had all 3 for this week. They all had monster weeks, insane weeks, and I don't think nobody could have beat him this week, except for our waiver wire team, which I will be coming up with in the next few minutes here, and he would have lost to them by like over 30 points. It's fantastic. But no teams this week could have beat him with those 3 studs. And they even overcame a couple of duds this week. They overcame MVS, who had both Packers, unfortunately. MVS, who had 2.3 fantasy points. He only had 1 catch for 18 yards. But like I said, there wasn't a lot of passing in this offense this game because it all went to the running. When all went to Aaron Jones. The whole thing was run through Aaron Jones. And then the Green Bay defense, they played against a good Dallas offense, and even though they had turnovers, 3 turnovers and 3 sacks, they still gave up a lot of points and yards. So the studs from Try and Pick Me from Auto Picking. There was only one stud. Leonard Fournette had 21.7 fantasy points. He had 23 rushes for 108 yards and a touchdown. He's really turned it around since I kind of shit talked him earlier this year about his 69-yard game. Gardner Minshew is a capable quarterback, and now defenses aren't completely stacking the box, stopping the run. So as long as Minshew does well, I think Fournette's going to do well. And the duds this week, he had 3 pretty big duds. He had Emmanuel Sanders, who I talked about earlier, and LaShawn McCoy, who I talked about earlier. 1 touch and 2 touches for the 2 of them. So, it looks like both of those players are fading. You might have to try to find some replacements for them going forward. And then Seattle's defense had -2 fantasy points. To be honest, I'm surprised that you started them against the Rams offense. I think even when the Rams offense has been bad, in air quotes, they've still been decent. So, I wouldn't have started Seattle's D, even though they're a pretty decent defense. I wouldn't really have started them against the Rams. They just have too many weapons. But matchup number 5, Mixon Mack versus the running Mayfields. Mixon Mack wins 126.4 to 92.6. Baker Mayfield put up the ultimate stinker for the running Mayfields, and they couldn't overcome his -2 to take out Joe Mixon and his Mac. So the studs for running Mayfields. Cortland Sutton had 17.2 fantasy points. Like I said, he's been taking over that offense. He had 4 catches for 92 yards and a touchdown. So he's looking pretty good this year. David Johnson had 17.1 fantasy points. He had 17 rushes for 91 yards and 3 catches for 65 yards. He continues to put up big numbers in both the rushing and the yardage categories, the receiving yardage categories. He doesn't have too many touchdowns. I think he has 3 touchdowns through 5 games, which is not quite near the top. It's kind of in the middle, but however, he's been very involved in the passing game, which has been giving him solid numbers every single week. Now the duds for the Mayfields. Baker Mayfield. I already mentioned him. I don't know why you are still starting him, but hopefully you pick somebody up on waivers this week. And he's really only had 1 or 2 even relevant fantasy football weeks where like you got a floor from him from any other quarterback. And OBJ, the 2 of them are kind of tied together right now. So, if Baker Mayfield picks up a little bit, if their offensive line picks it up a little bit, hopefully OBJ becomes more relevant. But He's just having a tough time. Now, Mix and Max studs. Chris Godwin with 28 fantasy points. He's continuing with the huge games. He's looking like a beast out there. Also, Julian Edelman had 21 fantasy points. He had 8 catches for 110 yards and 1 touchdown. On a day where the Patriots feasted, so did Edelman, of course. So he's been Brady's number one guy, the consistent player each week. For the duds on Mix and Mac, Eric Ebron, 1.3 fantasy points. The ultimate touchdown or bust guy. I think I was talking about this with Brissett. He doesn't see the end zone work that he did with Luck. So now moving on to the waiver wire team that would kick all of our ass. Oh wait. Before that segment, I apologize. I'm gonna relay my prediction results on the previous week. So following up all of the matchups, I went 1 for 5 this previous week. I'm getting worse, and I should stop my predictions before I lose all 5. However, I'm not going to stop my predictions because it makes it more fun. Now, the waiver wire team that would have beat all of our asses. In the quarterback slot, Teddy Bridgewater with 27.3 fantasy points. Chase Edmonds was the running back 1 with 16.1 fantasy points, backing up David Johnson with insane numbers. Running back 2, another backup running back, Reggie Bonifon. He's the backup running back to Christian McCaffrey, and I don't even know who that is. I've never heard that name before today. It's insane. It's just craziness. Now, the wide receiver 1 on waivers, Will Fuller, 46.7 fantasy points. Wide receiver 2, Byron Pringle, another big game from a Kansas City wide receiver that we've never heard of. So, one of you guys can pick him up. I'm not touching any of these guys, and they could goose me or they could get me 28 points, and I don't want to touch them. The tight end was Gerald Everett with 17.1 fantasy points. The flex spot was Darius Slayton, wide receiver for the Giants, I believe. He had 14.2 fantasy points. And the defense, the Eagles defense had a huge game with 2 touchdowns, and they had 35 fantasy points. That's massive. And then Dan Bailey had a good kicking game for 16 points. This team would have put up 205.7 fantasy points. It's insane. It's bananas. So it would be all of us. I think I'm gonna make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fantasy pickups this week. From the waivers, like people who we wouldn't think would do well at all, and just play them and hope that I get this random ass team that beats everybody else. I'll probably win every game from now on just by doing that. Just like $1 pickups, because I could do $0 pickups. Nobody would have picked any of these guys up. Maybe Will Fuller. Nobody would have picked any of these guys up. All right. Right on the heels of me saying I should stop my predictions forever, I'm going to do my matchup predictions for next week. Matchup number 1, the Scary Terrys versus Mix and Mac. Projected winner, the Scary Terrys. They will prove why they traded away Lamar Jackson and Devontae Adams to ride some amazing matchups from Keenan Allen to victory over Mix and Mac. Matchup number 2, the Running Mayfields versus Try and Stop Me from Auto Picking. Projected winner, the Running Mayfields. The Running Mayfields will shed their namesake, and with a new starting quarterback will barely squeak by Team Try and Stop Me from Auto Picking to win. Matchup number 3, Zerline That Never Hits You versus Rogers Cup. Projected winner, Zerline That Never Hits You. They will get their much-needed victory over Rogers Cup with a Melvin Gordon back at full strength, while Rogers Cup does their best Miami Dolphins impressions this year, trying to go 0-16. Matchup number 4, Brandon Cooks Kittlecorn versus Big Ben's Bathroom. Honestly, I don't know who I want to win this game. On one hand is Courts, who has won almost every single year. But on the other hand is Chad, who one is the newcomer, and two, he's 5-0 this year already, and he's got a big head because his team finally put up one good fantasy week, and nobody scored anything against him. He's just gotten lucky. So, although he does have a good fantasy team, you know, I don't know. It's tough. It's this is so tough. This is like the bigger, the least of the worst, whatever. The lesser of two evils. That's the word I'm looking for. The lesser. Unfortunately, the projected winner is Brandon Cooks Kittlecorn. Matt Ryan, CMC, and the New England defense play in joke matchups once again to score more than his whole opposing team, giving Big Ben's bathroom his first loss of the season. Matchup number 5. My tight end Ertz when Eifert versus Carry On My Wayward Son. Projected winner, Carry On My Wayward Son. Carry On My Wayward Son will fly to victory powered by the fuel of the Houston versus Kansas City matchup, of which he has 3 players, knocking my tight end Ertz when Eifert down a peg this week. Now, everyone should be super stoked. We got the first mailbag section, first question and answer session of this podcast. Woo! All right. And this is a great one. I had so many questions come in, but I'm getting close to my time limit here. It's been like almost an hour. I've been here so long. So I can only fit in one of these questions. So this is my first time reading the question as my producer put it into my show doc. So here we go. This comes in from Adam Stavel from Rockford, Illinois. Stop, I think. Anyways, hi Jason, big fan of the show. I was wondering, how do you dress for your morning shows and your evening shows? Thanks, Adam. Well, Adam, I know what you want me to say to the answer to this question, but the real answer is I get up and I shower first thing and I put on my work clothes and I'm actually hanging around for an hour in the morning with my work clothes on, doing this podcast. So I have just jeans and a polo or jeans and a shirt. Nothing exciting. And then in the evenings, I usually put on my comfy clothes for the evening. So right now I've got my gym shorts on and an old work T-shirt. Just a T-shirt. So nothing exciting. I know you're looking for some like lingerie answers, or I sit in my boxers and because nobody can see me. But I think presentation, how you dress. You want to dress how you want to feel. So I want to feel comfortable in this evening setting, and I want to feel professional in the morning setting. So that's my answer to the question. I'm always welcoming new questions. You guys can shoot them in a text to me or in a Facebook message. I will get all of the answers to all of your questions if I have time. So good luck to you guys this week, you choke bags, and goodbye.